Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are, distinguished panelists and guests. I'm honored to be hosting the session today on AI in the ChatGPT era that we face as higher educational institutions. And obviously, we are going to focus a lot on ChatGPT and GPT-4 in today's discussions. The AI era of ChatGPT is here upon us. There have been a lot of discussions around the positive impact of these kind of artificial intelligence tools, which has now become a part of our everyday lives, from virtual assistants to things like Siri and Alexa, to personalized recommendations that comes on social media platforms, to the advanced system used in healthcare, finance, and transportation, of course, in addition to education as well. Since November of the last year, there has been a tremendous amount of, I would say, anxiety and interest, both on equal par between educationists, students, and other policymakers as well. Higher education, as we all know, is dependent completely on assessing the learning process that we impart to our students in some form or the other, whether it's through examinations and assignments or projects. So the teachers are obviously asked to critically assess the learning outcomes and provide a justification as to why a particular person is better than the others. And so this has become a part and parcel of what is it that we are trying to deal with. Obviously, the integrity of such assessment is at stake right now with the evolution of artificial intelligence, machine learning languages, which is now called the new buzz is around GPT, which is the generative pre-trained transformer. The most popular one being ChatGPT or GPT-4, which is the new avatar of it. As well as other tools from other vendors as well. Obviously, these toolkits are ability to produce very high quality textual responses and questions posed to them, be able to write assignments probably worth, which is 5,000 words and 20,000 words long, and able to summarize that as well. And almost human-like. And so the question is obviously, how do universities and students face that prospect? And Sam Altman, who is the CEO of the creator of ChatGPT-4, OpenAI, that's the name of the company, has himself mentioned about the ills of such AI-generated engines to create disinformation and distrust in society. And he's pretty forthright in admitting that they are themselves trying to understand its limitations and boundaries. We as university administrators and we need to be understanding of these technology-led tools into our assumptions as we bring out our look at our environment. And we need to be realistic in how we can actually engage with these tools. Clearly, some of the thoughts processes around can we apply a blanket ban on these type of AI-led tools? Clearly, that has not worked in the past. It may or may not work in the future. So we need to be a little more thoughtful about this. On the other hand, the students are obviously pretty joyous in terms of seeing the tools of this nature. Seth Bergerson, a fellow at the World Economic Forum, who led the AI for Children concept or the project, he was mentioning to one of the news media recently that we call today's children as Generation AI. So the millennial generation now has become Generation AI because they are surrounded by AI almost everywhere they go, and AI models make decisions for them. They determine the videos they watch online and the curriculum in the school, the social assistance they get from the family, and such. So we need to be cognizant of what this really means to us as faculty and and administrators. So let us delve into this topic a little more with our esteemed panelists. And just to get introduced, I am Ramachandran. I'm a professor and vice dean of the Jindal School of Banking and Finance of OP Jindal Global University, based in Sonipat, Haryana. I'm joined first by Professor Suranjan Das, He is currently the Vice Chancellor of Jadavpur University. Professor Das is currently focused on the overall school administration of Jadavpur University, but he has also had long stint elsewhere at Calcutta University, where he has been a history professor as well as the Vice Chancellor there for a number of years. He's an honorary visiting professor at the University of Exeter. He is a graduate of the Presidency College, Kolkata, very reputed institution. He has done his BA, MA honors in history, as well as his DPhil from University of Oxford, or the Oxford University. He specializes in South Asian history and politics, especially identity politics, socio-cultural transformation, and nation building. He is very well published, as you can well imagine, and done research with very well-known international organizations like the British Council, Wellcome Trust, Leverhulme Foundation, and King's College London. Next, we have Professor Martín Hevia, and I want to especially thank Professor Martín for getting up at 1:30 in the morning to be with us from Buenos Aires. So Professor Martín is a Deputy Provost at the University Torcuato di Tella and Associate Professor at the School of Law. He was a Dean, previously Executive Dean and Director of the Law Degree Program as well at the School of Law. He holds a Doctors of Law degree from the University of Toronto in Canada and an Abogado, which is the JD equivalent from the University of Torcuato di Tella, where he is currently the Deputy Provost. He teaches courses on the foundations of private law and legal innovation. He's a member of several law boards and editorial teams across Canada, the US, Latin America, and of course, Argentina as well. He's a well-published author himself. Next, we have Professor Jasmeet Gulati. Professor Gulati is serving as the Professor of Law at the Jindal Global Law School at OP Jindal Global University. And she's also the Vice Dean of Examinations and Executive Director for Center for Developed International Legal Studies. She brings in a very unique perspective. The way I think about it is she's a long-time student, I would say. She has a PhD in International Criminal Law from Punjab University, Masters of Law, LLM, and Public International Law from University of Cambridge. She also has done her MA in Public Administration. She has also been involved in other management development programs at IIM Ahmedabad. She was a Nehru Scholar at the University of Cambridge and was awarded the Cambridge Commonwealth Scholarship by the Commonwealth University Trust in 1999. She has published 2 books and a number of articles in national and international journals. So we would obviously welcome her perspective, both from as a student, as well as an examiner, as well as a teacher. And finally, we have Professor Tejpavan Gandhok. Professor Pavan is a professor of practice in Jindal Global Business School. His applied research interests are in learning innovations, learning and immersive engagement, and biofeedback-based objective measures for better strategic thinking, and in better appreciating the role of subconscious cognitive processes of adaptive strategic decision under high flux and uncertainty. Clearly, there is a lot of high-tech words there, but what this all means is that how does our brain work in differing circumstances? Professor Pavan is also a serial entrepreneur with a strong record of investor returns and successful exits. So he has been turning around companies and helping out organizations from a startup standpoint from across different continents in Australia, US, Southeast Asia, and obviously in India, and working with a lot of strategic consulting and private equity firms. So that's, we have clearly a high-powered panel here. So let me open it up in the format of having some opening remarks, a few minutes opening remarks. We'll start with Professor Das, and then move to Professor Martín, Professor Jasmeet, and Professor Pavan. So your 3 to 5 minutes opening remarks on this whole topic of using GPT-4 or ChatGPT and other tools, AI-based tools for from a higher education learning standpoint. So Professor Das, over to you.
Thank you, Ram. Good morning to everybody. I just take 5 minutes to make pinpoint 2 or 3 points, and which could come up for discussion. Ram, you said the students are overjoyed with ChatGPT. But I can assure you, the faculty members are also overjoyed with ChatGPT because that will curtail their teaching learning process, that will curtail the time for preparing lectures. And as I said, the way there is a convergence of the overjoyed nature about the ChatGPT for the teachers and the students, it seems that the relevance, entire relevance of direct teaching learning process is at threat. Now, how do we combat it? Because ChatGPT, AI in any other form will come to stay. Now, I would like to make a couple of points which could be used as entry points for discussions of coping with ChatGPT and AI, because we cannot get rid of it. Now, as I see it, machine learning, whether AI or ChatGPT, is essentially based on description and prediction. But they do not posit causal mechanism or physical laws. This is my impression, I might be wrong. Now, if that is true, then we need to fine-tune our teaching learning process to emphasize causal explanations so that the people using ChatGPT who would be relying essentially on predictions cannot directly use ChatGPT to bypass the direct teaching learning process. That's the first, number one point that I'd like to make. The second point, any machine learning, and ChatGPT included, I think, has not the capability of distinguishing the possible from the impossible. While humans remain bound with rationally conjectured explanations, machine learning essentially relies on probabilities, which again change over time. And for this reason, predictions of machine learning systems always tend to be superficial, dubious, and temporal in nature. So again, if we, in our teaching learning process, as we go into in the context of challenge of the ChatGPT, if you are aware of this particular minus point of the AI, I think we can fine tune our teaching learning process to meet the challenge. The third thing, the little that I have seen about the ChatGPT is that the ChatGPT is essentially immoral, in the sense that our human intelligence is encapsulated by moral thinking, which implies the linking of the creativity of our minds with some universal ethical principle in whatever subject we are addressing. But my question is, can ChatGPT ensure this? No. If we look at the recent American literature critical of the ChatGPT, you will see that ChatGPT has increased the racial hatred, the racial tensions within the American society. Now, in our teaching learning process, if we can somehow imbibe the moral principles, then we can subvert some of the strategies that the ChatGPT is utilizing. I do believe that the goal of higher education should be to produce inclusive, constructive, and an interrogative civil society. That is why thinkers from Immanuel Kant to John Henry Newman, William von Humboldt, to Rabindranath Tagore and Mahatma Gandhi had distinguished the modern university from its medieval forerunners by envisaging it as an autonomous sphere in relation to the emerging nation state. The universities have to be conceived as an inclusive institution for producing learners who could theorize and question existing knowledge, thus becoming embodiments of modernity. So universities are required to be incubators of ideas and innovations, and they should be sources of enlightenment and not indoctrination. And reminding ourselves of Martha Nussbaum's trace on the university becoming a space for global citizenship. Again, if we fine-tune our teaching learning process around these lines, I think we can subvert the basic way in which ChatGPT is intervening in our teaching learning process. The final point, particularly for a country like India, which bears a rich legacy of pluralism and assimilative civilization, a modern university needs to particularly nurture the spirit of cohesion, remembering Tagore's ideal of education has been Mahatma Gandhi's visualization of education, seeking a proper and harmonious combination of body, heart, and soul. Now, if this particular approach towards higher education is adopted, then I think the, the intervention of ChatGPT can be sustained, and we can put ourselves on a fast track mode so that our teaching learning process remains there, but we can use the machine learning, but we do not become slaves to the machine learning process. That would be my initial remarks.
All right. Thank you, Professor That. You have brought up a lot of quote unquote interesting and controversial points here, and we'll try to delve on some of that. But before that, I'd like to hear a few words from Professor Martín.
Thank you so much for the invitation. It's a pleasure and an honor to participate in this panel about a very challenging topic everywhere. So let me just mention a few points that I think are worth discussing. And let me tell you that this I believe this is a global challenge. So a challenge that we have both in the global north and the global south. So in this case, both India and Latin America, I think, have the same educational challenges. So the first point I want to touch upon is the way we do research. And I think this is one of the most interesting issues dealing with artificial intelligence, mainly because I think it could be that the way we look at authorship in general could change because of the use of artificial intelligence. So let me give you a short example. So let's say I have an idea, so I am the author of an idea. I discuss my idea with colleagues in my faculty and in global workshops, and then I ask ChatGPT to help me improve my writing, or I tell, as one colleague told me here in Argentina, well, let's imagine I tell ChatGPT, well, help me make this paragraph more legible because my English is not as good as I think it is. So the question there is, am I still the author of that paper? Is it me and the artificial intelligence? My intuition is that I'm still the author, but I'm not sure. So this is something that will radically change the way we think of what we as researchers do and how we think of research and contributions, the contributions we make as researchers to society from educational institutions. So research is one thing I want to bring to the table. The other thing is obviously the challenge for teaching and for exams. So one of the main points we want to discuss here. So and how and a role as institutions that engage in credentializing what our students do. And there, I think one of the challenges that was just mentioned is if we ought to think about the fact that if we use artificial intelligence and ChatGPT in particular, then we have the challenge of access to technology. This is not new for us, as we all know. When we all decided we're gonna use, say, Zoom for teaching during the pandemic. One of the challenges was, well, not every student will have access to this technology. And so I think access to artificial intelligence will put, or actually already puts, pressure on us as educational institutions to discuss how we're gonna guarantee access to this technology to all our students so that everyone will have the chance to use it if in case we decide it's a useful tool for the type of education that we want to provide for the new generation of leaders. And the other one is the challenge that we have as teachers. And there, I think some institutions, for example, in the United States, have decided to actually ban access to ChatGPT. But universities, generally speaking, have decided that they will include its use and decide that each professor can decide whether he or she wants to use with her students this type of educational tool. And I think that's the right way to think about it. That is, this is an opportunity for us as teachers to rethink the way we teach, the way we engage with our students, the type of activities we think of to improve learning experiences, so we can have much more experiential education. Of course, those typical tests where students are used to memorize will no longer be useful to credentialize knowledge. So I see this as a great opportunity to, once again, to improve learning and teaching processes. So I wanted to put these thoughts on the tables to start our discussion today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Martin. Professor Jasmeet, can you please keep your comments to about 3 minutes so we can get to the questions?
Right. Thank you, Professor Ram, and thanks to the Jindal Global Center for G20 Studies for this conference and for having invited me. I'm delighted to be part of this distinguished panelists. And to take on this discussion, the theme of this session is very important as well as intriguing in the present day context, especially for us as educators, instructors, and even learners. The emerging technologies have impacted every sphere of our lives, and they have played a very important role in education, as it also helps us in realizing our fundamental right to education. But looking at higher education, technology has changed the traditional or the conventional way of doing research. It has made things easier and brought all the resources or the readings to be used in research just merely at the click of mouse. The most recent highly controversial AI tool being, as we all know, the ChatGPT, which has raised concerns for us, not only as educators, but as evaluators also. The students, they find an easy way of doing research through these language model tools, which will prepare their assessments, essays, assignments in just a few minutes, which would otherwise take them weeks to write and go through that research and that in-depth research. Students are using ChatGPT not only for their research, but it is also being used to write university applications. Now, this has its own negatives because when the admissions are based on the applications, it will be difficult to arrive at a decision on admission based on an application which is generated by an artificial intelligence. Well, ChatGPT is only one of its kind, but there are more on the way, as we all know. And this is not the first time that we are facing the issue regarding academic honesty. But even when journals or libraries became digital, it was easier for students to cut, paste the work and submit or present it as their own. Whereas with ChatGPT, also the fear is the same, though here it's not cut, paste work, but definitely the work which is generated is not their own. As Professor Martin also said, the issues with regard to authorship, that remains. While going forward, maintaining the integrity of examination process is of utmost importance. I also speak because I come from my work profile as an administrator comes from examinations of the law school. And we will figure out ways to deal with such situations through the best practices also. And I will also be sharing my views on the same. I look forward to the views of my co-panelists at the same time. But to conclude my introductory remarks, I would quote Einstein when he said that education is not the learning of facts, but the training of the mind to think. And I think ChatGPT is not training our minds to think that way. Well, I've just kept it short.
Thank you, Professor Jasmeet. And last but not the least, Professor Pawan, I know that you have a lot of interesting ideas and thoughts, and so let's hear from you.
Thank you, Ram. Yes, I mean, it's always a challenge of being the lucky last, but I think just building on some of the comments, most particularly Professor Suranjan's, and this the last comment by Professor Gulati. I think a lot of the discussion and debate about, and first of all, I'd like to make the following 4 points. First of all, we should talk about generative AI as an entire class, not just ChatGPT. This is very rapidly evolving. A lot of the views formed were largely about the earlier avatar of ChatGPT. A lot of those weaknesses have already been addressed by version 4 and is bound to. And my personal view is, or bet is, that I think Google is not just sitting idly by, but waiting for an ambush or waiting to optimize its profitability and cost curve on this. So there will be lots of avatars. Second point, it's not just about writing. There's a lot of very interesting uses of generative AI for video, websites, code, illustration, etc. So third point, most reactions are first order reactive and typically defensive. I mean, if you think about, especially the university reactions, whereas the more interesting, issues to be considered should be proactive and higher order effect issues. And so as a couple of illustrations of this third point, if you look at word processing, Excel, calculators, the variety of history of tools, they have been enormous productivity, benefit, but the smart users are able to, deliver a higher order of human intelligence and performance by, appropriate use of these productivity tools. The mediocre or poor performers actually display a poorer level of functioning of the human skills by merely relying on this, on these tools. So and therefore lose out in the rat race, so to speak. And so I suspect that arc of history will continue its sweep. There will be greater separation between winners and losers, between more productive adopters of these techniques. And so I think the framing of the questions about universities merely focusing on mere credentialing and trying to protect the historical ways of credentialing should be changed to the question of what skills and capability levels will the marketplace really care about, and what skills and levels should we be actually credentialing for? The bar will typically be higher. I think the work expectations, the value add expectations of a lawyer, an accountant, a program coder are about to decline sharply. And so we shouldn't be just questioning, how do we protect the way we examine currently? We should be questioning what are the skill sets that we would be expecting in an essay or some kind of output. And the bar needs to be much higher than most people currently pass in our search for mass credentialing. So I'm certainly from the final point, I'm certainly of the point of view that the effective use of these tools needs a lot of skill imparting, especially to aim for a higher level of human capability. And so we should be, proactive adopters of them. And my final point, universities are not effective enough dialogue partners, and they need to be playing a much more significant role in the debates about the societal safeguards. The rate of this progress, as we can see over the last few months, is accelerating, and the societal impacts are going to be much more significant. But if you think about it, no significant university figures have been part of either the OpenAI consortium in the development, nor in the call for halting or slowing down or cause for pause. And we need to have, some of the leading thinkers from universities be much more important parts of those higher order effect discussions, rather than worrying about, how do we protect exams from this. Over to you.
No, thank you. I think we have had some very interesting opening comments, which touches from bridging the teaching learning process and the immorality of using these kind of AI tools in some ways. To how do we essentially use this to train the minds to the question of equity and making these infrastructure available to students across the board. And then Professor, Pawan, you kind of rounded it off by talking about how do we effectively use these and engage the higher educational institutions in promoting those kind of higher order dialogues, right? So let me kind of delve into a little more specifically. I know Professor Das, you have to leave shortly. So let me start trying to think about this in a more tactical manner, even though we have to think long-term as to how to address this. So how are our universities, from your standpoint, how are you trying to tackle this situation in at least from a reactive standpoint? And what is it that you're thinking more from a strategic standpoint in terms of how we are going to address it as an educational system, as an administrator of a large university? How are you planning to do that? And then, I'll probably take that from there on.
Yeah, thank you. Well, my prescription would be that we have to rely more and more on direct mode of teaching. If we rely more and more on direct interactive mode of teaching, then we can engage the students creatively. We can engage the students critically. And some of the challenges that the ChatGPT is posing in terms of preparing answers, preparing compositions, preparing music, preparing songs, that can be addressed. So in one way, I am happy in the sense that I am a great proponent of direct classroom teaching. So I can foresee a situation where more and more, in view of the challenge posed by ChatGPT, we will be relying more and more on direct classroom teaching, of course, using the education technology. Education technology needs to be used to enrich teaching learning process, flipped classroom, hybrid mode, and the more we can directly engage students, I think some of the challenges posed by the ChatGPT will be addressed.
And so how do we do that? When you use the word direct learning process in the classroom training, the engagement of the student, even in these days, we talk about the generation AI of students, right? They are so much glued to their mobile devices and smartphones and other platforms, right? How do you do that in a classroom setting, Professor Das?
Well, I think it depends on the quality of the teacher. Still now, a teacher who teaches well, still now a teacher, if he can keep the students engaged, the students remain attentive. I am not again saying that I am against the using of education technology. Of course, we should use it, but not at the at the cost of direct interaction with the students. The teachers need to be trained. The teachers need to be told that yes, use the education technology, but try to engage the students in a direct mode. Of course, it will be difficult for a conventional university which has a large number of students. But again, time is coming when in the context of new education policy, where there is a talk of the clustering of institutions, where there's a talk of flipped classroom, where there's a talk of using hybrid mode, I think the conventional picture of 150, 200 students in a classroom might change. But direct teaching, I think, is the only way to address the challenge posed by the ChatGPT.
Okay, thank you, Professor Das. So I want to pick it up from there and then probably ask Professor Martin, in terms of if you were to have these kind of tools, this class of tools, if you will, right? And because Professor Pawan kind of talked about not just specifically ChatGPT, whether it is something else or generative AI techniques, how do teachers, how can teachers essentially leverage that? If you can think of a few ways that you think universities and higher education institutions, or your own university, how do you think that teachers can actually leverage that from a teaching perspective? I will talk about the research separately, but purely from a teaching standpoint.
Can I make one more point and perhaps I will leave? Just one point.
Yeah, please go
I
ahead.
think here the teachers need to be more and more innovative. The way of framing questions in a conventional mode, that has to be changed, stopped. The way of, when I speak of the teaching learning process, the way of conventional mode of the teaching learning process has to be changed. So innovative teaching learning process with engaging the students in a creative dialogue, I think is a major way out.
Okay, fair enough. That is clearly understood. Thank you so much, Professor Das. Yeah. Professor Martin, I would still request you to address the question of how do we use these kind of tools and technologies to provide creative teaching in the classroom.
Thank you. Well, this is one of the probably main challenges, and I'm not still sure that we as professors have already included the technology that students are already using, say, mobile phones and even laptops in classrooms. And the changes are so fast, and new things and new technologies are coming out. And so I would say there's something about the magic of the classrooms that I would vindicate here that is very important. So we as university administrators know, because students usually also, assess their teachers, and we have information and we know our teachers too. And so we know who's actually good or better and who can improve and do better when teaching in what we could call the traditional way. And there are even professors who don't actually and never use PowerPoint. They are because they are so good and so engaging in what they bring to the classroom that their students are actually, paying attention and participating and discussing interesting questions. And then there are those who actually use a lot of PowerPoint, which was a new technology maybe 15 years ago. And their classrooms are just a repetition of what's in the text. So yes, we ought to be very innovative. Some of us will work in including and using artificial intelligence and other technologies that will come out. But we also need to be very, we have to know that there are some excellent professors that will not use it, and they will be excellent as they already are, because they are very good in the way they engage the classroom. So we have to actually, I think, learn from those professors, even those who want to use the new technologies, because they are already very engaging. They make good exercise. They work with the students. The students want to go to attend those classes. So the traditional, we have to also learn about from the traditional way of doing things, the way these excellent professors work with their students. And then if we want to use these technologies, we will use these technologies and include them. But we have those models and those role models that I think that there's a lot to learn from them, and take lessons from people who are already very, very good without using new technologies and artificial intelligence.
So basically what you're recommending is that we send all professors and teachers back to school and let them learn the art of teaching, a true art of teaching from the experts and these geniuses. So that's a great point. I think there is something to be said about the entire infrastructure of how we are generating teachers, just based on research. Sometimes they may not produce the the best teachers, but that's what we have to train them appropriately, which is a valid point. I want to go back to the other question in terms of that is staring in our in front of us, which is around the whole fragility of these assessments and the problems with our existing education system that we currently have. Because training the teachers is going to take time. It is going to be over a period of time, over a number of years, right? And it has to be more systemic change that needs to happen. So, so my question to Professor Jasmeet is, especially as you are dealing with examinations and assessments, do you think asking the students? I think Professor Das also kind of made a reference to that. Asking the students to write assignments and essays, or even what type of essays, is that, do we need to revisit that whole process of how we are going to grade them? I mean, this whole, we use tools to check for plagiarism and, such. There are plagiarism checks even for this ChatGPT. But the question is, what kind of overall strategies can we adopt to counter the rise of use of these AI machines to provide answers? Is there, I mean, can you think of anything that we can do in a more tactical fashion?
Thank you for this question, Professor Ram. I think I'll take it on from what Professor Das was commenting on the need to train the teachers, and also Professor Martin talked about that. When we talk of training the teachers, not only for the purpose of teaching, but also the kind of assessments that they will be giving to the students. Although for us, as in this university, we have moved back to the physical mode for end semester exams. But as far as internal components are concerned, students are given these essays to write or assignments to write. But again, the issue is that what if they are also being written by the artificial intelligence and they're taking help of ChatGPT? There, I would suggest, and we are planning to have this sensitization program with the students at our university, and also sensitizing the faculty at the same time, that when we are giving them assessments, there must be follow-up questions. All right, we give them, because we also have to inculcate the research skills. I mean, we cannot do away with these kind of assessments where research is required, where they have to write essays, research papers. So that is also a very important component of higher education. So that cannot be ignored. But the only thing is that we should have a follow-up question answers kind of viva thing in the classrooms, or maybe tutorials with the group only, not the entire class. There is one-to-one question answer round. The faculty would know, or the instructor would know that whether the student has taken help from the ChatGPT or that kind of thing. Apart from that, for example, for our LLM dissertations, we are already doing this, that when we are asking our students to write dissertation, there is the first draft that the students have to submit, which is a shorter draft, and then the second draft. At the same time, we are also looking at their presentations. They are able to answer. Taking help is one thing. We understand that they're taking help from ChatGPT, and that is very valid. It's a kind of a Google search engine that, you search something and you get it. But the way you are using it, you should, this is what we are also trying to tell the students, that you should not say that this is your own work. So whatever you are writing should be your own work. You can take help at the same time, but you should be clear about what you're writing. Your research should be complete with regard to the topic and not with regard to the artificial intelligence tools. So that should be there. And at the same time, as I said, follow-up question answers or tutorials is a very welcome thing, the way we do it. Also for LLM dissertations, first draft, second draft, third draft before the final draft is there. So,
all right. I want to kind of go back to Professor Pavan. You touched on this, and this is what I wanted to bring as an element of surprise and talk about what happens to students once they do graduate, right? And then when they go seek jobs. And then already the industries are complaining that the educational system is not producing graduates who can actually go and be job ready on day one, right? And when we are providing these kind of machine-enabled assistance, probably their level of comprehension, ability to apply and think critically of problems and solutions may further erode, right? So there was actually a very recent study which was probably published about 10 days back, actually, from some of the University of Pennsylvania scholars, Taina Lendu, Sam Manning, Pamela Mishkin, and Daniel Rock. And what they did was they investigated the potential implication of using these generative pre-trained transformers and using these kind of models, and figured out as to whether these have got any impact on the US labor market, right? And they use certain rubrics to come up with the response and answers. And what they did say was that the GPT-4 is going to have some impact. When I use the word some, 80% of the workforce will have at least 10% of their work tasks affected directly, right? And about 20% of them are going to have, may see at least 50% of their tasks impacted. Clearly, I mean, if you go to ChatGPT-4 and say you want to write a program or create a website, it'll do it in a matter of a few seconds. That's the nature of that the tool. So my question to you, Professor Pavan, is how are these different avatars of generative pre-trained transformers going to impact employment, and how changes are going to be brought out in the labor market? Anything that educational institution can train the students on? You talked about the critical skills. So is there anything that can be, that we can actually incorporate in our higher educational institutions so that we are training our students?
Yeah, I think the starting point has to be moving away from this excessive focus of and this instinctive reaction of just trying to protect the current modes of assessment, and actually questioning much more deeply what is our current mode of assessment actually testing for, versus what are the skills that the marketplace will actually value. You can see increasingly the link between the existing modes of university credentialing and the links between workplace success being very weak for precisely this reason. I mean, if I could, provocatively, and pardon me, Professor Gulati, for sharing, how many lawyers does the world need? How many low-level accountants will the world need? These are issues that we will have to come to grips with. And the flip side of that is, what is the skill set in a good lawyer or in a good accountant or in a good content writer or a good marketer that the world is, jobs marketplace or the world for entrepreneurs, etc., is willing to reward. And that even in the current avatar of ChatGPT, you can see very clearly what those skills are. The fact is that ChatGPT in its current versions will make up facts, and skilled humans can pick that up who have a context-specific understanding or knowledge. So you need actually to actively be encouraging students adopting these tools and displaying the higher level skill set of being able to refine and improve their thought process. So for example, anecdotally, currently, you could actually argue, Ram, that even currently, even with word processing and Google and the kind of research productivity and writing productivity tools that even currently exist, you don't need as many lawyers to do the base level drudgery of tasks, or even accountants to do those base level tasks. And unfortunately, we can already see evidence that a large army of lawyers in the real world is earning very low salaries in that overall pyramid, because of that. So somehow the higher level skills need to be trained, and that context specific understanding is what is still currently enabling. If you search in anecdotally, if you search the marketplace for good in-house content writers is still underserved. They're still, not able to find the talent. The marketplace for lower level freelance, the kind of small bits, easily outsourced content writing is going to completely vanish away from, the Airtaskers and the TaskRabbits of the world, because that's what can be automated and as it already starting to happen, right?
Very good.
I hope that begins to, address some of your question, but essentially, I think this excessive focus, even in the earlier comments about teaching, actually we should focus much more on learning, which is not necessarily what the teacher is imparting, but what the student is picking up. The moment you start to flip it that way, then experiential learning and use of these tools in real world contexts for specifically higher order contexts becomes far more important than an LLM Viva or a master's dissertation in that context. I hope that helps. Sorry, I guess you can see where I come from. Very much a Maverick's approach to the world. So
no, that is fine.
Shake up and stir up.
So I want to kind of take a couple of questions from the audience as well. Basically, the question is, while the technology world is moving ahead with the Web 3.0 and other types of technologies being brought to fore, are the universities, to your point, Professor Pavan, are our universities actually or one of the laggards in terms of adapting technology to the needs of the hour? And so when we are always trying to do a catch up, it always leaves a delta in terms of our learning process. And so we are never ever going to catch up, and we are always going to be reactive in that sense, right? So I want to pose this, Professor Martin, and then come to you, Professor Pavan. So are we doing educational students are always going to be perennially in a catch-up mode because technologically they are not up there? That's a question.
Well, I think one of the interesting questions is what kind of research are we doing at universities that can help us improve our learning objectives and teaching objectives, and not being reactive. As you know, graduates from universities, even PhDs, many of them are not working at university once they graduate, but they go, to the job market and they work for technology companies or for private companies. And that's where innovation is taking place, and not so much in or at universities. And as a consequence of that, education institutions are becoming more reactive than active to what's going on outside. In some sense, that has been happening in many dimensions, because many of us do our actual work is to analyze what's going on in society. So that's one of the things that we do at universities. We critically assess our societies and contribute to improving societies. So one of the things we ought to be thinking is what kind of research we do that could contribute not to be reactive, and how can we be much more active in developing these new tools and then bringing into our teaching and learning objective. And one of the challenges there is funding, obviously. How do we get funding to do this? And this is one of the challenges for all of us. And then how we push somehow some dimensions of the research that we do at universities to go along that direction. So innovation that has to thought for contributions to what we as institutions that provide higher education do for society? What's our role for society?
Okay. In the interest of time, I think we have got another 5 minutes to go. So what I would, and Professor Pavan, if you want to give a very short response, I'll take that short response, please.
Yeah, I've already put my points on the chat. I think this is entirely foreseeable. We've been talking about this, about the human skills winning in an AI world for a long period of time. It's just that we did anticipate that it would happen so quickly, and it will continue to happen. So it's not about being reactive. It's actually, I think, a consistent human arc that is showing that the people who were erroneously trying to, push their kids into white hat junior coding classes at an early age are probably, taking a suboptimal choice. It is increasingly a low code, no code AI world. The human skills win. So, and the human skills, I mean, I won't go through all of that list, but those are much harder to test for in a 3-hour exam. It doesn't matter whether it's an open book or a closed book.
Right.
You can test those in a case specific, complex problem solving kind of nature. So this is not necessarily something that we need to chase our tail for.
Okay. Excellent. I have one last question, and I would direct that to Professor Jasmeet. And this again coming from the audience in terms of can you think of any innovative ways that we can use these tools in a most productive ways, whether administratively or from a learning perspective, because we kind of did not even touch on the administrative academic administration part of it. And so if you can think of how we can leverage that, especially from an administrative standpoint, as well as in terms of online teaching and other mechanisms that more and more higher education institutions are moving towards. So if you have any thoughts, please.
Thank you. So I would rather answer it from the academic perspective, from how the students can learn from there, while at the same time keeping research in mind. So, for example, I would say that these language model tools, since they are being used to generate work, so in specifically taking example of a language class, where generating some kind of a poem from AI, students can be asked to critically analyze it, to critically examine that. Here we are using it also. We have accepted that tool in our academics. At the same time, we are leveraging it from the students' perspective so that they are able to comment on what the AI has generated. So that way, I think it would be helpful. Apart from using it for the purpose of administration, things get a lot easier for us, specifically as far as forming the, especially for examination, UMS system where we are working, or ERP system where we are working. So it gets easier on for us when it is already made for us. We just need to give our inputs, and they will prepare that for us to be used for the examination purposes.
All right, fantastic. So it looks like definitely these generative tools can be used to promote, I would say, inclusivity and diversity in higher education. We can provide more personalized education to students, and then use the outcome of these tools to help critically analyze what the artificial intelligence tools are saying. And that's maybe one way to think about it. And then we also discussed in terms of how we have to be a little more innovative from a teaching perspective and the assessment standpoint to probably use some of these one-on-one techniques or other mechanisms to be able to use that. While we did talk about some of the advantages, both from a research and teaching perspective, I think clearly things around, how can we stop perpetuating biases, and Professor Das had initially mentioned about these potential inequalities that may arise because of these biases. So we need to make sure that the training on these things are done correctly. And then we need to be participative in that entire ecosystem to make sure that when these type of tools are being done, we are both for and against. We are, the academicians are being engaged. I know that industry stalwarts are being engaged. Policymakers are being engaged. I think the academics needs to take a more active role in ensuring that the AI of the future is working with humanity and with human beings and for human beings rather than against us. So with that very happy note, I would like to conclude and say thank you so much to our esteemed panelists. And hopefully we just got a very short teaser on the subject, and we can have much longer discussions at a later point in time. So thank you, and wish you all the very best. And thanks, Professor Martin, especially. You can go back to sleep now.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.